Hi, Founder fans. Jason here, and today's founder is John Haslet. Specifically, we're going to talk about the little-known Battle of Mamaroneck, which I know I mispronounced, and I'm sure David Price, who's here to help us, will correct me. It's also known as the Skirmish of Heathcote Hill, and like I was saying, who better to help us learn about Haslet but the man who literally wrote a book, David Price. Mr. Price, thank you so much for coming back to talk about John Haslet.
Thank you, Jason. It's a pleasure to be here. Long time no see, all of 2 weeks.
Yeah, exactly. Well, welcome back. Just to jump in and get a little background on Haslet, what colony was he from, and what occupation did he have leading into the Revolutionary War?
Oh boy. Well, he was from Delaware. He was an Irish immigrant
Okay.
who, when he first came to North America, lived in Pennsylvania. And then he was in the militia during the French and Indian War, Pennsylvania militia. Then he settled in Delaware afterwards. And so he was, I like to say he was always reinventing himself throughout life. He was an ordained Presbyterian minister turned, militia captain during the French and Indian War, turned physician, I use that term loosely, and then 17th or 18th century context, turned planter, turned politician, served in the Delaware Colonial Assembly, turned revolutionary activist, and finally, turned Continental Regimental Colonel, leading the Delaware Regiment, the Delaware Blues in 1776, and finally, ultimately, a martyr to the cause, being killed at the Battle of Princeton on January 3rd, 1777.
Right. You skipped right to the end of his life there. Well, let's go back a minute to the one part of his life that you had mentioned you'd like to focus on today, which I understand goes by several monikers. And again, if you want to say it, as we were talking about before the show, driving past the town my whole life, I never heard it pronounced. I thought it was the Battle of Mamaroneck, but how do you pronounce it?
Mamaroneck.
Mamaroneck. The Battle of Mamaroneck, also known as the Skirmish of Heathcote Hill, if I've got that right, because it's a little bit too small to be a battle, too big to be a skirmish.
I've been advised that the locals, the history aficionados in Westchester County, refer to it as the Skirmish of Heathcote Hill. I like to call it the Battle of Mamaroneck because it makes it sound a little more significant, perhaps. And I know you're into really obscure Rev War events. Well, I don't think they come any more obscure than this.
Well, let's hear it.
But I do think it was notable in a couple of respects. One is that, of course, as has been noted by many historians, and I think accurately so, this was America's first Civil War and the Revolution. So the Battle of Mamaroneck, skirmish, raid, whatever you want to call it, it was either a large skirmish or a small battle. You had about 12 to 1,300 men involved combined. So it was the first clash between organized, to use the common terms, organized patriot and loyalist infantry units of the Revolution, as far as I know, where there were no British or Hessian troops involved. The other thing that was notable about it, and I should point out that it did not alter the strategic dynamic of the New York campaign, the 1776 New York campaign, which we know was a little short of an unmitigated disaster for Washington and his army. But what was noteworthy, to the extent anything is, about this engagement, this encounter, is that it was a rare American triumph in what was otherwise a series of unrelenting setbacks in the fall of 1776 during the New York campaign. And at least based on Haslet's account and others too, his contemporaries, the Army, the Continental Army commanders, his brigade commander, Lord Sterling, aka General William Alexander, going right up the chain of command, thought it was a fairly big deal at the time. I found a letter that was written by one of Washington's secretaries, a Lieutenant Colonel Robert Harrison, on October 22nd, 1776, which was the day Well, the day that the battle was fought, the battle was actually fought at about 4 a.m. in the morning. But later that day, after Haslet's men had returned to camp, and he had advised Lord Stirling of their success, limited success. It was an incomplete victory, but a victory nonetheless. Um, Colonel Harrison writes a letter, presumably at GW's direction, to Governor John Trumbull of Connecticut, saying something to the effect that I have the pleasure of informing you that Colonel Haslet led a raid on this loyalist unit, um, and um, and the loyalist unit was a force of about 500 soldiers from, well, mostly locals from Long Island, from Westchester, from Connecticut, some from Virginia, that were commanded by someone who you've probably heard of, a then colonel, formerly major during the French and Indian War, Robert Rogers, who had earned fame as a wilderness fighter. And he came back to America in 75 as a retired British officer, receiving half pay. So he was viewed with some skepticism and suspicion by the Patriot side. And it's not clear whether he was whether he intended to be a British spy, or whether he was just offering himself to the highest bidder. But apparently he did try to join up with the Continental Army. They looked askance at that. He was allegedly involved, although I don't think any proof has been forthcoming, of being involved in a plot to assassinate Washington in New York in the summer of '76. He was taken into custody, but he escaped, fled to Long Island, which was occupied by the British Army at the time, and offered his services to General William Howe, the British commander. Howe commissioned him as a lieutenant colonel and authorized him to raise this battalion of loyalist soldiers, and it became known as the Queen's American Rangers in honor of Queen Charlotte, George III's consort.
Right, fascinating. And Robert Rogers has become fairly popular because of the show Turn, where there are certain liberties taken in that. But if I'm not mistaken, he is leading the Queen's Rangers in that show, which is giving him a little more popularity than people like John Haslet, for example.
I think the Queen's American Rangers went on to play a fairly significant role, at least as far as loyalist units go, during the Revolution. But my understanding is that Rogers, within a fairly short period of time after the Mamaroneck engagement, kind of slipped off into obscurity.
Right.
There is one other footnote, I guess I should add to this, and maybe it's fitting considering that the Haslet raid, if you want to call it that, which was an incomplete victory because they failed in their primary objective, which was to capture Rogers, who was viewed as a traitor, and they were not able to do that, even though they did maul his unit a good bit.
Right.
When something that took the sheen off this victory, if you will, is when Haslet's men were returning to camp in the early morning hours on October 22nd, so visibility wasn't great. They ran into another American unit that had been similarly engaged, Samuel Miles Pennsylvania Rifle Regiment, that was returning from their own overnight raid. Well, I don't know whether it was because of the uniforms, the blue uniforms that the Delaware Blues were wearing, which perhaps made them look like Hessians, or according to traditional accounts, they were wearing mitered caps, which also would have made them look like Hessians, although this has been disputed by more recent historians. But whatever the reason, the Pennsylvanians mistook the Delaware for the other side, and there was an exchange of friendly fire. There's a misnomer. I don't know what's friendly about it, but misdirected fire, if you will.
You're supposed to be friends.
6 Pennsylvanians were killed and 9 Delawares, and that was a higher casualty account than what Haslet's unit Haslet's contingent had suffered during the raid, because they only lost 3 or 4 dead fighting Rogers' men. But they did capture 36 of the enemy, some 60 firearms, and so when they returned to camp, according to Haslet's own account, they were greeted as victors by Lord Stirling, and by the rest of the army.
That's fascinating. I'm curious if the friendly fire casualties made it into the letter to Governor Trumbull or not.
Yeah, I don't know. I don't know.
Yeah, no, it's interesting. And to circle back on that, actually, this is a fascinating conversation, but it's really set into me how you mentioned that they really promoted, hey, this was a victory. It might not actually have been the biggest victory in the world, but they were celebrating it. Because to put in context, I believe you said it was October of '76, so this is 2 months after the British take New York City, but 2 months before Washington crosses the Delaware. These are the dark times, people, right?
Yeah, yeah.
So this one seemingly small skirmish could be a big morale booster to the army and the separate colonies at the time, or states at the time.
Yeah, and it was followed by a major battle only 6 days later, so that would have further um, perhaps buried it in terms of its
Right.
its obscurity in our historical consciousness. The Battle of White Plains, which was fought on October 28th, was a much bigger deal, and Haslet's unit was also um, very much involved in that in a critical role, which I go into at some length in cue the moment of shameless self promotion in this book.
Well, I've upgraded now because I can do the promotion. I mean, I can throw this up here too at the
Oh,
end.
there you go. Okay, that looks better. Right.
I'm trying. I'm trying to help my guests out. Yeah, no.
Yeah.
And I do want to point out that, as you were saying, the Battle of White Plains is extraordinarily important. But another reason that this might get lost is the greater New York City region was kind of a no man's land throughout most of the war. So there were, over the years, not just in 1776, but over the years, dozens, if not multiple dozens, of smaller, lesser known skirmishes throughout the region. It's often forgotten that New York, northern New Jersey,
Absolutely.
Pennsylvania were extraordinarily important battlefields in the war.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yeah.
And
So,
Mamaroneck was, just it was, I guess, another example you could say of the leadership that Haslet and his unit, the Delaware Blues, who were one of the truly elite units in Washington's army at the time, that they displayed. They were, they started out as the largest regiment in his army, almost 800 men in the spring of 1776. But by the time of Mamaroneck, they were down to about, let's see, I would say, well,
times were
300
tough.
some, and they would continue to attrit due to battlefield casualties, disease exposure, departures, some authorized, some not, till by the end of the year, after Washington's crossing of the Delaware and his victory over the Hessians, most of the remainder of Haslet's unit, which at that point is down to about 100 men, they go home thinking their terms of enlistment are up. And so when he goes into battle, where he meets his fate at Princeton on January 3rd, 1777, all that's left of the Delaware Regiment is Colonel Haslet and 5 other soldiers.
And they don't do so well because, as you said, that is unfortunately where he meets his fate. I
Right.
guess we should leave the rest for the book, and we will recommend everyone go to the link in the description below and pick up a copy of John. Give me the full title.
John Haslet's World, An Ardent Patriot, the Delaware Blues, and the Spirit of 1776.
Right, what I would call the authoritative biography of John Haslet. Go pick it up through the link below. Mr. Price, thank you so much for joining us again, and I assume you'll be back soon to tell us about more obscure American Revolutionary stories.
Thank you for having me.
My pleasure. Founder fans, again, big thank you to David Price for coming and hanging out with us today. Thank you for watching. Make sure you pick up a copy of the book through the link in the description below, or one of the many other books he's written. While you're down there, hit like, make sure to subscribe for American Revolution 6 days a week, and I'll be back with another Founder for you tomorrow.